Hey, so tonight we're going to talk about something that might make you a little glad for your modern, sanitized existence. Forget your ergonomic chairs and your filtered water. We're stepping back, way back, into a world where power wasn't just won on the battlefield or through clever diplomacy. Sometimes it was brewed in a tiny vial, slipped into a goblet, or painted onto a glove. We're plunging into the glittering yet utterly terrifying royal courts of Europe, where a queen's greatest enemy might not be a rival army, but a seemingly innocent meal. Imagine the opulence, the silk, the jewels, but beneath it all, a constant, gnawing fear. How would you navigate that labyrinth of suspicion, where every smile could hide a dagger, and every feast a fatal secret? It's a stark contrast to your safe home, isn't it? So, get ready to feel the chill, to smell the fear, and to understand the brutal elegance of survival in an age of silent killers. All right, find that cozy spot, dim the lights, and let's unlock the gilded cages of history, where ambition often tasted like bitter almonds. You find yourself standing on polished marble, the chill seeping through the thin soles of your imagined court slippers, a stark contrast to the plush carpet beneath your feet right now. The air around you, thick with the scent of beeswax polish, expensive perfumes, and the faint underlying tang of wood smoke from a distant hearth, is so different from the crisp, clean air you breathe in your own home. You're in a grand hall, let's say the Palace of Versailles or perhaps the Alcazar of Seville, during an era when candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. Imagine the sheer scale of it all. Tapestries depicting heroic battles or mythological scenes hang heavy from the walls, their threads rich with centuries of dust and stories. They absorb sound, creating an odd muffled silence that amplifies the rustle of silk gowns, the clink of a sword against a scabbard, the hushed whispers that seem to ripple through the very fabric of the court. You see the faces around you, a sea of powdered wigs, painted smiles, and eyes that betray nothing, or perhaps everything if you know how to read them. This isn't your comfortable living room. This is a place where every gesture, every word, every glance is meticulously weighed, analyzed, and often misinterpreted. Now let your gaze drift to the queen. She sits upon a throne, or perhaps holds court in a richly appointed salon, her posture impeccable, her jewels catching the light. Her gown, a masterpiece of embroidery and heavy brocade, might be beautiful to behold, but you can feel its oppressive weight, the tight lacing of the corset beneath, restricting her breath, a physical manifestation of the constraints placed upon her life. You look at her, a figure of immense power and dazzling beauty, and you might think her life is one of endless indulgence. But lean in close, and you might catch the subtle tremble in her hand as she raises a goblet to her lips, or the way her eyes dart nervously towards a new arrival carrying a tray of sweetmeats. This is the reality. Beneath the glittering surface, the royal courts of Europe were viper pits, dens of intrigue where the stakes were not just reputation or wealth, but life itself. You, with your modern sensibilities, your trust in food safety regulations and medical science, can barely fathom the constant, low-level hum of paranoia that permeated these spaces. Your biggest worry about a meal might be if it's healthy or if you ordered too much takeout. For them, every bite could be their last. A new dish, a gift of exotic fruit, a simple glass of wine, each held the potential for a swift, agonizing end. The concept of poison queens isn't just a dramatic trope from historical novels. It was a very real, very terrifying aspect of royal life. It was the silent weapon, the assassin's choice when a blade was too crude, too obvious, too easily traced back to its wielder. A queen, often seen as a symbol of fertility, continuity, and stability, was also a prime target. Her death, especially if sudden and mysterious, could plunge a kingdom into chaos, alter lines of succession, or settle old scores without the messy implications of open warfare or public execution. Think about the sheer intimacy of it. This isn't a distant enemy on a battlefield. This is a poisoner who must gain access, who must be trusted, or at least be able to blend into the intricate ballet of court life. It could be a disgruntled lady-in-waiting, an ambitious courtier, a jealous rival, or even a physician whose loyalties had been bought. The poisoner could be someone you shared a joke with yesterday, someone who bowed low and offered a compliment, all while harboring a deadly intent. You might be accustomed to a world where a sudden illness typically means a trip to the doctor and a prescription. In these courts, a sudden illness, especially among the powerful, automatically triggered suspicion. Was it a natural affliction, a fever, a bad humor? Or was it something far more sinister, a slow-acting venom designed to mimic natural disease, to erode a life gently, imperceptibly, until the victim simply faded away? The methods too were insidious. It wasn't always a dramatic, immediate collapse. Sometimes it was a gradual wasting, a persistent cough, a loss of appetite, a creeping lethargy that could be dismissed as melancholy or a seasonal ailment. This made it even more terrifying. You wouldn't know if you were being poisoned until it was too late, until the symptoms became undeniable, and by then a cure was often impossible. Imagine the psychological toll. You can't trust your food, you can't trust your drink, you can't trust the hands that prepare your bath, or even the scent of a new perfume. Every sensory input becomes a potential threat. The richness of the fabrics, the sweetness of the confections, the warmth of the wine, all become suspect. This isn't a world of clear-cut dangers, it's a world of invisible threats, of whispers and shadows, where the deadliest weapon is often undetectable until it has already done its work. Consider the Queen herself. She is expected to be a paragon of grace, to produce heirs, to act as a political pawn or a diplomatic bridge. Yet, she lives in a constant state of vulnerability. Her body is not entirely her own. It belongs to the state, to the lineage. Any threat to her physical well-being is a threat to the kingdom. You might enjoy the freedom of choosing what you eat and drink, but for a queen, even that simple act was fraught with peril. A taster, a designated individual who would sample every morsel before it reached the royal lips, was a common fixture. Can you imagine delegating the ultimate trust, the safeguarding of your life, to another person, knowing that they might also be compromised? The very act of watching someone else eat your food, waiting for their reaction, would turn every meal into a morbid spectacle, a testament to the ever-present danger. This isn't a thrilling novel where the hero always uncovers the plot in time. This is history, raw and often brutal. The poisoners were often successful, their victims fading into the annals of history with little more than a question mark beside their cause of death. The queens, for all their power and privilege, were ultimately trapped in a gilded cage, their lives constantly under threat from within their own supposed sanctuary. The opulence of their surroundings, the beauty of their attire, the deference shown to them, all served to mask a profound fragility, a vulnerability to the most intimate and treacherous forms of attack. The very air they breathed, the very food they consumed could turn traitor. It's a chilling thought, isn't it, to consider that beneath the veneer of absolute power lay such absolute personal danger? You, in your modern comfort, might find this hard to truly grasp, but try to feel the weight of that fear, the constant vigilance, the silent dread that haunted the dreams of Europe's poison queens. Now, let's peel back the layers of time a bit further, venturing beyond the immediate grandeur of the Baroque courts and into the deeper history of how this insidious practice took root. You might think of poisoning as a medieval or Renaissance phenomenon, but its tendrils stretch back into antiquity, a dark thread woven through the fabric of power struggles long before the queens of Europe wore their elaborate ruffs and farthingales. Imagine yourself in ancient Rome, not the Rome of glorious legions and philosophical discourse, but the Rome of backroom deals, whispered conspiracies, and the ever-present threat of a sudden, unexplained demise. The air here is different. It's dusty, hot, filled with the clamor of a bustling city, the scent of exotic spices mingling with the less pleasant odors of a sprawling metropolis. You're not just observing, you're feeling the oppressive weight of a society where power was absolute and often ruthlessly maintained. The Romans, in their pragmatic and often brutal way, understood the effectiveness of poison. It was a tool, a means to an end, often employed by those who couldn't wield a sword or command an army. You're walking through the forum, the sun beating down on your head, imagining the senators in their togas, the patricians in their villas. But beneath that veneer of civic order and imperial might, there was a constant undercurrent of fear. Think of Agrippina the Younger, mother of Nero, a woman whose ambition knew few bounds. The stories swirl around her like the dust devils in the Roman streets. She was accused of using poisons to remove rivals, to secure her son's ascent to the throne, and even, legend has it, to eliminate her husband Emperor Claudius, with a dish of poisoned mushrooms. You can almost taste the earthy rich flavor of those fungi, now tainted with a deadly secret. Imagine the scene. A lavish banquet, the finest wines, exotic delicacies, and then a sudden grip in the stomach, a cold sweat, a rapid decline. This wasn't a world of meticulous autopsies and forensic science. A sudden stomach ailment could easily be attributed to natural causes, especially if the victim was already of advanced age or perceived as frail. The stories of Roman poisoners like Locusta, a notorious professional poisoner employed by Nero, are chilling. You might think of a professional assassin as someone who uses a blade or a bow. But Locusta operated with a different kind of precision, a chemical artistry. She knew her herbs, her venoms, her dosages. She could craft a poison to kill swiftly, or to mimic a lingering illness, giving the appearance of a natural death. Imagine the fear of knowing such a person existed, that their services could be bought by your enemies. Your modern world has pharmaceutical companies with strict regulations. There's had shadowy figures concocting death in back alleys, their knowledge passed down through generations, often shrouded in secrecy and dark magic. As you move through the centuries, the practice doesn't disappear. It merely evolves, adapts to the changing social and political landscapes. The fall of Rome didn't extinguish the art of poisoning. It simply scattered its practitioners and its victims across the nascent kingdoms of Europe. You can see the threat of it in the Byzantine Empire, where court intrigues were legendary, and in the early medieval courts, where superstition and a lack of medical knowledge made poison an even more potent and terrifying weapon. If a king or queen suddenly fell ill after a feast, what could anyone do? The physicians of the era, with their limited understanding of anatomy and disease, would often resort to bloodletting or purging, methods that might hasten death rather than prevent it, further obscuring the true cause. You, with your access to emergency services and advanced diagnostics, live in a world where a sudden collapse is met with immediate, informed action. For them, it was often a terrifying mystery, a swift descent into the unknown. Fast forward to the Italian Renaissance, a period of immense artistic and intellectual flourishing, but also one of unparalleled political ruthlessness. This is where the legend of poison truly solidified its place in the European consciousness. You hear the name Borgia and immediately, a chill runs down your spine. The Borgias, Pope Alexander VI, his children Cesare and Lucrezia, became synonymous with poison, their reputation so stained that it echoed through the centuries, even if many of the specific accusations against them were later exaggerated or fabricated by their enemies. But the fact that such accusations were so readily believed tells you everything you need to know about the atmosphere of the time. Imagine yourself in a palazzo in Rome or Florence, the air heavy with the scent of incense and the sweet, cloying aroma of ripe fruit. You're at a banquet, the tables groaning under the weight of silver platters, exquisite wines flowing freely. You watch as a servant pours wine from a carafe. Is it just wine? Or is it a carefully prepared mixture, perhaps a dose of cantarella, a supposed Borgia family poison, often described as a white powder, tasteless and odorless, that could be mixed into food or drink? The fear wasn't just of death, it was of the agonizing, drawn-out death that some poisons could inflict, mimicking diseases like consumption or dropsy. You'd be looking at the faces around you, trying to discern a flicker of malice, a hint of satisfaction. But these courtiers were masters of dissimulation, their smiles as false as their promises. The perception of poison as an Italian art, a dark secret past among the cunning and ambitious, spread across Europe. It was seen as the weapon of choice for the Machiavellian prince or the scheming queen, a method that bypassed brute force in favor of subtle intellectual malevolence. This reputation, whether entirely deserved or not, created a powerful psychological weapon. The mere threat of poison could be as effective as its actual use, fostering paranoia and distrust that crippled opponents and secured power. You might scoff at the idea of a poison expert today, but in those times such individuals were both feared and highly sought after, their knowledge a dark currency in the ruthless game of power. The very lack of reliable detection methods was what made poison so potent. No modern toxicology labs, no detailed chemical analyses. A sudden death was often attributed to God's will, or a natural humoral imbalance, or even witchcraft. This ambiguity was the poisoner's greatest ally. You could commit murder in plain sight or at least in plain taste and often escape justice. The fear you're feeling now, just imagining it, is a pale reflection of the constant gnawing anxiety that must have permeated the lives of those who held power. They lived in a world where the most intimate act, sharing a meal, accepting a gift, could be a prelude to their demise, a chilling testament to the brutal ingenuity of those who sought to control the destinies of kingdoms through the most clandestine of means. This historical backdrop, these ancient roots of treachery, set the stage for the specific terrors faced by the queens we will explore next. You've imagined the fear, the paranoia, the glittering courts masking dark intentions. Now let's delve into the chilling practicalities, the very science, or rather the dark art, behind these silent killers. Forget your modern understanding of chemistry, your precise measurements, your sterile laboratories. We're stepping into a world where the line between medicine and poison was often terrifyingly thin, where knowledge of the natural world could be twisted into instruments of death. The air here might smell of dried herbs, pungent resins, and metallic tangs, the kind of scent that would make you immediately suspicious in your own kitchen, but which might have been commonplace in an apothecary's shop or a royal physician's private chamber. You might be used to reading ingredient labels and understanding exactly what you're consuming. In this era, ignorance was not bliss, it was potentially fatal. The poisoners of royal courts weren't always mad scientists. Often they were simply individuals with access to common substances or obscure botanical knowledge, twisted to malevolent ends. Think about arsenic, for instance. A white, tasteless, odorless powder, it was known as the king of poisons and the poison of kings. You could easily mistake it for sugar or flour, a terrifying thought when you consider how readily available such staples were in any kitchen. Imagine a queen sipping her morning tea, sweetened with what she believes to be sugar, unknowingly consuming a fatal dose. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, muscle cramps, could easily mimic cholera, dysentery, or a severe stomach ailment. You, with your smartphone and access to WebMD, might quickly suspect something. But in a world where doctors believed in humors and miasmas, such symptoms were often attributed to natural causes, to an imbalance in the body, or simply to a bad constitution. The slow, agonizing decline, the gradual weakening, the eventual collapse, it all looked tragically natural. Then there were the plant-based poisons, a veritable garden of death. You might admire a beautiful foxglove in a cottage garden today, but its leaves contain digitalis, a powerful cardiac glycoside. In the right dose it could be a medicine, in the wrong, a killer causing heart failure. Imagine the queen's herbalist, trusted to prepare remedies, subtly altering a recipe, adding a leaf too many. Or hemlock, the very substance that executed Socrates. Its effects are paralyzing, leading to respiratory failure. You would experience muscle weakness, loss of coordination, difficulty breathing, a slow, terrifying descent into paralysis while your mind remains agonizingly clear. What about belladonna or deadly nightshade? Its berries, so deceptively appealing, contain atropine and scopolamine, causing delirium, hallucinations, blurred vision, and eventually coma and death. A queen could be slowly driven mad, her erratic behavior attributed to hysteria or demonic possession, before her eventual demise, all while the poison worked its insidious magic. Consider the more exotic poisons, often brought from distant lands, adding to their mystique and terror. Opium, while often used as a painkiller, could also be administered in fatal doses, causing respiratory depression. Strychnine, derived from the seeds of the Strychnus nux vomica tree, caused violent convulsions, muscle spasms, and ultimately asphyxiation. Imagine the queen writhing in agony, her body contorting unnaturally, her breath coming in gasps. Such a sight would surely be interpreted as a divine punishment, a seizure, or a demonic fit, rather than the result of a deliberate act of poisoning. The sheer horror of witnessing such a death, without understanding its true cause, would be etched into the memories of those present. And it wasn't just about what was ingested. Some poisons could be absorbed through the skin. Think of lead, a heavy metal often found in cosmetics and pigments. While its effects are usually chronic, causing a slow decline, mental impairment, and organ damage, concentrated forms or prolonged exposure could be fatal. Imagine a queen, constantly powdering her face with lead-based white makeup, or applying lead-infused rouges, unknowingly poisoning herself over time. Or mercury, another heavy metal, used in various alchemical preparations and even some early medicines. It could cause neurological damage, tremors, madness, and eventually death. You, with your knowledge of environmental toxins and safety regulations, would recoil from such substances. For them, they were simply part of the available toolkit, their dangers often poorly understood. The poisoner's art was not just about selecting the right substance. It was about the delivery. How do you administer a poison without arousing suspicion? This required ingenuity, patience, and often, an intimate knowledge of the victim's habits and tastes. A favorite dish, a trusted drink, a daily ritual, these were all opportunities. The poison could be slipped into a queen's morning broth, mixed into her wine at a banquet, dusted onto her fruit, or even painted onto the pages of a book she was known to read, to be absorbed through her skin as she turned the pages. Imagine the queen, engrossed in a manuscript, her fingers brushing against a deadly residue, completely unaware of the silent threat. The concept of a slow poison was particularly terrifying. These were substances designed to kill not instantly, but over days, weeks, or even months, mimicking a natural decline. This allowed the poisoner to distance themselves from the act, to cultivate an alibi, and to ensure that suspicion fell elsewhere. You might be accustomed to immediate medical intervention for any sudden health crisis. For these queens, a lingering illness was a period of intense vulnerability, a time when their enemies could watch them waste away, their hopes fading with each passing day. The lack of modern forensics meant that often, the only evidence was circumstantial, based on rumors and suspicions rather than scientific proof. A sudden death could be explained away as a stroke of God, a fever, or consumption. This ambiguity was the poisoner's greatest ally, allowing them to operate in the shadows, leaving behind a trail of mystery and fear. The fear of these silent killers was so pervasive that it led to elaborate precautions. Royal tasters were employed, individuals whose lives were literally on the line, tasked with sampling every dish and drink before it reached the royal table. Can you imagine the sheer tension of such a job? Every meal a potential death sentence. Every sip a gamble. You, sitting comfortably, might find this concept almost theatrical, but for them, it was grim reality. Antidotes, often more superstition than science, were sought after, from bezoar stones, believed to neutralize poisons, to complex herbal concoctions. But these were often ineffective, offering little more than false hope in the face of true venom. The sheer vulnerability, the constant awareness that your life could be extinguished by an invisible hand, made the royal courts a place of exquisite beauty and profound terror. the chemistry of death, in its subtle and brutal forms, was an ever-present, silent guest at the royal table, a chilling reminder of the fragility of even the most powerful lives. Now, let's talk about a queen whose name is almost synonymous with poison, a figure so entwined with the dark arts of the court that her very existence became a byword for Machiavellian cunning: Catherine de' Medici. You've heard the name, perhaps in hushed tones, perhaps in dramatic historical accounts. But to truly understand her, you need to step into her world, a world of shifting alliances, religious wars, and a desperate struggle for power in 16th century France. The air here is heavy with a scent of ambition and fear, a distinct contrast to the predictable routines of your own life. This isn't a story of clear heroes and villains. It's a deep dive into the murky waters of survival in an era where power was everything and morality often a luxury. Catherine arrived in France from Florence in 1533, a Medici, a name already tinged with the reputation for ruthless political maneuvering and, yes, a certain proficiency in poisons that we discussed earlier. She was an outsider, a tradesman's daughter, in the eyes of the old French nobility, often overshadowed by her husband, King Henry II, and later by his mistresses. Imagine the isolation, the constant scrutiny, the pressure to produce heirs in a foreign land where you are both queen and yet constantly underestimated. You, with your ability to choose your friends and carve your own path, can only begin to grasp the rigid confines of her existence. She was a woman of intellect, a patron of the arts, but also a pragmatist who understood the brutal realities of power. The legend of Catherine as a poisoner began to solidify after the sudden, mysterious deaths of several key figures in her court, particularly during her regency for her young sons. The whispers started small, like rustling leaves in the vast gardens of the Tuileries Palace, then grew into a roaring wind that carried her dark reputation across Europe. Was she truly a master poisoner, or was she simply a convenient scapegoat for an era rife with disease, poor sanitation, and a pervasive belief in invisible killers? The truth, as always, is far more complex and far less dramatic than the legends suggest, yet the fear she inspired was undeniably real. Imagine you are a lady-in-waiting at Catherine's court. You witness her quiet intensity, her sharp intelligence. You see her surrounded by her flying squadron, a group of beautiful, often politically astute women she used to gather intelligence and influence men. You might admire her resilience, her unwavering determination to protect her son's fragile claim to the throne. But you also feel the underlying tension, the constant dread that permeates the court. Every sudden illness, every unexpected death, is eyed with suspicion. You hear the whispers of Italian arts, a veiled reference to the poisons supposedly brought from her homeland. You might even hear tales of her personal perfumer René Le Florentine, who was rumored to concoct not just exquisite fragrances, but also deadly venoms. Imagine him, a quiet, unassuming man, mixing his potions in a secluded chamber, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and perhaps something far more sinister. The most famous or infamous of her alleged poisoning victims include Jeanne d'Albret, the devoutly Protestant Queen of Navarre and mother of the future Henry IV. Jeanne died suddenly in Paris in 1572, just before the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, allegedly from a pair of poisoned gloves Catherine had given her. You can almost see the elegant gloves, perhaps embroidered with delicate silk, seemingly a harmless gift, yet carrying a fatal secret. The story goes that Jeanne, known for her strong sense of smell, inhaled the poison as she tried on the gloves, leading to a swift, agonizing death. The reality was likely a natural death from tuberculosis or pleurisy, but the timing, the political context. Jeanne was a formidable Protestant leader whom Catherine desperately needed to neutralize, and Catherine's existing reputation made the poisoning accusation instantly believable. You, with your knowledge of modern forensics, would demand an autopsy, a chemical analysis. For them, the narrative of a poison gift was a far more compelling explanation than a mere illness. This fear of poisoned objects extended beyond gloves. Imagine poisoned books, their pages laced with arsenic, killing the reader as they turned the pages. Or poisoned candles releasing toxic fumes as they burned. These were the terrifying rumors that swirled through the court, creating an atmosphere of pervasive distrust. You couldn't even accept a seemingly innocuous gift without wondering if it carried a death sentence. This pervasive paranoia was a weapon in itself, designed to destabilize, to sow discord, and to keep everyone on edge. Catherine's supposed modus operandi was not always about dramatic, instant death. Often it was about subtle, slow-acting poisons designed to mimic natural illness, to erode a person's health gradually, making their death seem inevitable. This allowed her to maintain an air of plausible deniability. You wouldn't know if you were being poisoned until it was too late, until the symptoms became undeniable, and by then a cure was often impossible. This slow, insidious method was far more terrifying than a sudden violent attack, because it allowed for a prolonged period of agonizing uncertainty, a constant question of whether your body was betraying you or being betrayed. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, a brutal slaughter of thousands of Huguenots, further cemented Catherine's image as a ruthless, calculating figure, willing to use any means necessary to secure the power of her Catholic sons. While the massacre was a political and religious upheaval, not a poisoning, it demonstrated her capacity for extreme measures, lending credence to the darker legends surrounding her. You, looking back from your safe distance, might try to rationalize her actions within the context of the religious wars that tore France apart. But the sheer scale of the violence and her perceived role in it painted her as a cold, unfeeling monarch, a woman capable of anything. In the end, Catherine de' Medici was a queen who navigated one of the most tumultuous periods in French history with remarkable skill and an iron will. She survived her husband, 3 of her sons who were kings, and countless political and religious upheavals. The accusations of poisoning, whether true or not, served a purpose. They instilled fear, they deterred enemies, and they reinforced her image as a formidable, dangerous opponent. You can almost feel the weight of her reputation, a cloak of fear she wore both willingly and unwillingly. She was a queen who understood that in the brutal game of power, appearances were everything, and sometimes, the illusion of being a silent killer was just as effective as the reality. Her legacy is a complex tapestry of political genius, cultural patronage, and the enduring shadow of the poisoned chalice, forever linking her name to the dark arts of the royal court. You've seen the grandeur, felt the chill of ancient treachery, and glimpsed the shadow of Catherine de' Medici. Now let's talk about the pervasive, suffocating atmosphere that these threats created. The relentless grip of paranoia that tightened around the royal courts, making every smile suspect, every meal a gamble. Imagine living in a constant state of low-grade anxiety, where your very survival depended on an unceasing vigilance. This is a far cry from your modern life, where trust in public safety and the rule of law allows you to move freely, to eat without fear, and to sleep soundly. For a queen in these times, such peace of mind was an unimaginable luxury. Step into the queen's private chambers, a place that should offer sanctuary, a respite from the demanding public life. But even here within these richly appointed walls, the fear lurks. You might see heavy velvet curtains drawn against the drafts, a roaring fire in the hearth, and perhaps a small, intricately carved wooden chest containing personal letters and precious trinkets. But beneath the comfort and opulence, there's an unspoken tension. The Queen's ladies-in-waiting, her closest companions, are also her most immediate circle of potential threats. You observe their movements, their expressions. Is that servant pouring her wine a loyal retainer, or has their hand been turned by a rival faction? Is the new physician highly recommended, truly dedicated to her health, or a pawn in a deadly game? The paranoia wasn't just a personal failing, it was a rational response to a very real danger. Kings and queens were not just individuals. They were symbols, embodiments of the state, and their lives were constantly under threat from ambitious relatives, disgruntled nobles, foreign powers, or religious zealots. Poison offered a subtle, deniable way to remove a monarch and reshape the political landscape. You would constantly be asking yourself, who benefits from my death? This question would echo in your mind with every ache, every sniffle, every moment of fatigue. Consider the daily rituals. Every meal became a meticulous, ritualized performance designed to ward off death. The royal taster, a figure whose very existence is a testament to the pervasive fear, would stand by, a silent sentinel. You watch as they sample a morsel of roasted pheasant, a sip of ruby-red wine. You see their face searching for any sign of distress, any flicker of pain. The waiting, the silent observation, would transform the act of eating, one of life's simplest pleasures, into a terrifying ordeal. Can you imagine having to watch someone else risk their life for your every meal? The psychological burden of that responsibility, combined with the constant fear for your own life, would be immense. It's not like ordering a meal from a restaurant and trusting health codes. This is a personal, intimate gamble with every bite. Even beyond the food, every personal item became suspect. New garments, gifts of jewelry, cosmetics, even the water for bathing, all could be vehicles for poison. Imagine a queen receiving a beautiful new gown, the fabric shimmering with intricate embroidery. She might admire its beauty, but a part of her mind, a cold, calculating part born of fear, would wonder if it had been treated with a contact poison, designed to seep into her skin. You might find yourself compulsively examining everything, running your fingers over surfaces, inhaling deeply, searching for any telltale sign, a subtle discoloration, a strange odor. This isn't just vigilance. It's a hyper-awareness that borders on obsession, eroding trust in everything and everyone around you. The very air itself could be a source of dread. Rumors of poisoned candles releasing toxic fumes or poisoned incense, designed to slowly debilitate, circulated through the courts. Imagine the queen trying to relax in her chambers, the sweet scent of burning frankincense filling the air, and a nagging voice in her head whispering, "Is this truly harmless? Or is it slowly killing me?" The lack of scientific understanding meant that any unexplained illness could be attributed to these insidious methods, further fueling the paranoia. You, living in a world of air purifiers and carbon monoxide detectors, take for granted the safety of the air you breathe. For them, even the air could be a silent assassin. The psychological toll on the queen herself would be immense. She is expected to be strong, serene, a beacon of stability for her kingdom. Yet internally she is a prisoner of fear. Every headache, every stomach cramp, every moment of fatigue would trigger a cascade of terrifying questions. Is this natural? Or is it the beginning of the end? The constant suspicion would isolate her, even from her closest confidants. How could she trust anyone when anyone could be bought, coerced, or simply acting out of ambition? You might have your moments of doubt or mistrust in your relationships, but imagine that doubt extending to every single person in your inner circle, knowing that their betrayal could mean your death. This paranoia wasn't just a personal burden, it permeated the entire court. Nobles suspected other nobles. Servants feared their master's enemies. The atmosphere was one of stifling tension, where alliances were fragile and betrayals were commonplace. The slightest misstep, a careless word, an unintended slight, could make you an enemy and therefore a target. You'd learn to guard your tongue, to observe more than you spoke, to cultivate a mask of polite indifference, even as your mind raced with suspicions. This wasn't a place for genuine friendship or open communication. It was a stage for elaborate performances, where everyone played a role, and the stakes were always life and death. The legacy of this paranoia lingers in historical accounts, in the dramatic stories of queens who died mysteriously, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. It reminds you that power, for all its allure, often came with an unbearable cost. The loss of peace, the erosion of trust, and the constant, chilling awareness that death could be lurking in the most beautiful of guises. You can feel the weight of that historical burden, The profound difference between your secure existence and the precarious lives of those who wore the crown, forever haunted by the silent threat of the poisoned cup. The grip of paranoia was a constant, invisible tormentor, making the gilded cage of royalty a living hell for those who feared a bitter draught. You felt the paranoia, seen the tools of the trade. Now let's delve into the dark heart of the matter, the motives. Why would someone resort to such a clandestine, terrifying act? What could drive a person to orchestrate the slow, agonizing death of a queen? The answers are as complex and deeply human as they are chilling, often intertwined with the very fabric of royal existence. Forget your modern motivations, career advancement, personal fulfillment, financial security. For them, the stakes were far higher, often encompassing entire dynasties, nations, and personal survival. You're entering a world where ambition was a sharp-edged weapon, and love could be twisted into a fatal obsession. First and foremost, there was power. This is the most obvious and perhaps the most common driver. A queen, whether a reigning monarch or a consort, held immense influence. Her death could clear the path for a rival faction, an ambitious noble, or a different line of succession. Imagine a powerful duke, frustrated by the queen's influence over the king, or by her support for a political rival. He sees her as an obstacle, a barrier to his own ascent. A public assassination would be too risky, too easily traced back to him, and would likely lead to open revolt or war. But a slow, mysterious illness? That provides plausible deniability, allowing him to feign grief while quietly consolidating his power in the aftermath. You can almost feel the cold calculation, the ruthless logic of such a decision. For these individuals, the life of a queen was merely a chess piece to be removed for strategic advantage. Then there was succession. This was often intricately linked with power. A queen's inability to produce an heir, or her production of the wrong kind of heir, a daughter when a son was desperately needed, or an heir from a previous, less favored marriage, could make her a target. Imagine a king desperate for a male heir, surrounded by ambitious courtiers who whisper about the queen's barrenness or her unsuitability. Her removal, through natural causes, could pave the way for a new marriage, a new queen, and hopefully, a new heir who would secure the dynasty. Or perhaps a royal family, desperate to prevent a particular individual from inheriting the throne, might target a queen whose children were in the direct line of succession. You can feel the immense pressure on these women, their bodies seen as mere vessels for the state, their personal well-being secondary to the needs of the crown. Revenge was another potent motivator, often deeply personal and simmering for years. A queen might have slighted a powerful noblewoman, denied a favor, or been perceived as responsible for the downfall of a family. In a world where honor was paramount and grievances could fester for generations, poison offered a way to deliver a deadly, satisfying retribution without the risk of open confrontation. Imagine a noblewoman whose family lands were confiscated due to the queen's influence, or whose beloved relative was executed on the queen's orders. She might cultivate a position within the court, biding her time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike, not with a sword but with a vial. The satisfaction of a quiet, deniable revenge, watching her enemy waste away, would be a powerful, dark allure. And then there's the twisted realm of love and jealousy. Royal courts were hotbeds of illicit affairs, intense passions, and bitter rivalries. A king's mistress, ambitious and eager to secure her own position or that of her children, might see the queen as an inconvenient obstacle. Imagine the mistress, consumed by jealousy, whispering in the king's ear, subtly undermining the queen and perhaps, eventually resorting to more drastic measures. Or a scorned lover, a courtier whose advances were rejected by the queen, might seek a terrible vengeance. You might think of modern romantic dramas, but the stakes here were infinitely higher, involving not just broken hearts but broken lives and altered destinies. The emotional intensity of these relationships, amplified by the rigid social structures and the constant scrutiny, could easily boil over into deadly acts. Political and religious strife also played a significant role. In an era of religious wars and shifting allegiances, a queen's faith or her political leanings could make her a target. Imagine a Catholic queen in a Protestant land, or vice versa, surrounded by fervent zealots who see her as a threat to their faith or their nation. Her removal, framed as an act of divine judgment or a natural infirmity, could be seen as a righteous act, a way to purify the kingdom or secure its religious future. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which we touched upon with Catherine de' Medici, highlights the brutal extremes to which religious fervor could lead, and while it wasn't a poisoning, it shows the readiness to eliminate perceived threats. Poison was simply another tool in this brutal ideological warfare. Sometimes the motive was simply fear or self-preservation. A queen might discover a plot against her, or stumble upon a dangerous secret. To silence her, to prevent her from exposing the conspirators, poison might be seen as the only option. Imagine a queen who inadvertently overhears a treasonous conversation, or finds incriminating documents. Her sudden illness would be a convenient way to eliminate a dangerous witness. You can feel the desperate urgency of such a situation, where survival itself becomes the ultimate motive. Finally, there was the darker, more obscure motive of psychological manipulation or sheer malevolence. Some individuals might have simply enjoyed the power of life and death, the thrill of wielding such a clandestine weapon. Or they might have been driven by deep-seated psychological issues, their actions stemming from a twisted sense of justice or a desire for control. These motives are harder to trace, harder to understand, but they add another layer of complexity to the already murky world of royal poisoning. The chilling aspect of these motives is how deeply human they are, even in their deadliest manifestations. Ambition, jealousy, revenge, love, fear, these are emotions we all experience. But in the rarefied, high-stakes environment of a royal court, where the consequences of failure were so dire and the rewards of success so immense, these emotions could be amplified to murderous proportions. You, in your ordered society, have legal avenues for dispute resolution, and social norms that discourage violence. For them, in a world of limited accountability and absolute power, poison offered a silent, effective, and often unpunishable solution to their most pressing problems. The calculation was deadly precise, weighing a queen's life against the perceived gains of her demise, a brutal testament to the dark side of human nature played out on the grand stage of European royalty. You've explored the motives and the methods. Now let's turn our attention to a queen whose fate was sealed by a king's desire for an heir, but around whom whispers of poison, though ultimately unfounded, nevertheless circulated, Anne Boleyn. Her story is one of meteoric rise and catastrophic fall, a tale that reshaped England and forever altered the course of history. You might know the popular narrative, the king's obsession, the break with Rome, the eventual execution. But imagine yourself in the Tudor court, a place of vibrant pageantry, intellectual ferment, and chilling political ruthlessness. The air here, though perhaps clearer than the Roman or Florentine courts, is thick with the tension of religious upheaval and the volatile moods of a monarch who held absolute power. Your modern understanding of justice and due process would be utterly alien in this world. Anne Boleyn, a woman of sharp wit, intelligence, and undeniable charm, captivated King Henry VIII. She was not a demure, passive queen. She was a force of nature, educated, fashionable, and deeply committed to the Protestant reforms gaining traction in Europe. Her ascent meant the downfall of Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, and the dramatic schism with the Roman Catholic Church. You, with your ability to choose your own beliefs, can only begin to grasp the seismic shift this represented for an entire nation. Her position was precarious from the start, built on the king's volatile affections and the desperate need for a male heir. The whispers began almost immediately, fueled by the animosity of Catherine of Aragon's supporters and the deeply conservative elements of English society who resented Anne's influence and the religious changes she embodied. When Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, died in 1536, After years of ill health and virtual imprisonment, the rumors of poison naturally flew. You can imagine the scene. A queen once powerful, now isolated and ailing, her death a convenient resolution to the king's great matter. While modern historians generally agree Catherine died of heart cancer, the immediate reaction at the time, particularly among those who despised Anne, was to suspect foul play. And who would be the prime suspect? The woman who stood to gain everything from Catherine's removal. This is where the psychological game of poisoning comes into play, even when no actual poison is used. The threat or suspicion of poison was a powerful weapon in itself. It could be used to discredit rivals, to sow discord, and to cast a dark shadow over anyone who benefited from a convenient death. And, already unpopular with many, was an easy target for such accusations. Her very existence, her rapid rise, and the radical changes she brought about made her a lightning rod for suspicion. You can feel the weight of public opinion, the way rumors could take on a life of their own, regardless of the truth. But the true irony for Anne Boleyn is that she herself would eventually face a similar fate, albeit by a far more direct and public method. When she failed to produce a male heir, giving birth to the future Queen Elizabeth I, but also suffering several miscarriages, Henry VIII's affections began to wane. He had risked everything for her, broken with the Pope, defied an empire, all for a male child. And she had, in his eyes, failed. His gaze turned to Jane Seymour, a quieter, more demure lady of the court. The king, accustomed to getting his way, needed a quick solution to his new great matter. You can imagine the frantic scramble in the court, the desperate attempts by Anne and her faction to regain the king's favor. But Henry's mind was made up. He needed a way out, a legal justification to annul his marriage to Anne, or failing that, to remove her permanently. And this is where the accusations against Anne became truly desperate and ultimately fatal. She was accused of adultery, incest, and treason, charges almost certainly fabricated to secure her downfall. Yet even in the midst of these trumped-up charges, the fear of poison was still a palpable undercurrent in the court. While Anne was not accused of poisoning anyone herself, the very atmosphere of suspicion meant that her enemies could easily have considered it as an option for her. Or, more subtly, had Anne fallen ill and died in the Tower before her trial, the whispers of poison would have been deafening, effectively providing Henry with his desired outcome without the messy public spectacle of an execution. You can feel the chilling pragmatism of the era. A queen's death, by any means if it served the king's purpose, was often seen as a political necessity. The reality, of course, was far more brutal and less subtle than poison. Anne Boleyn was arrested, imprisoned in the Tower of London, and eventually tried for treason. The charges were flimsy, the trial a sham, but the outcome was predetermined. She was condemned to death. You can imagine her final days in the Tower, the cold stone walls, the distant sounds of London, the knowledge that her life was forfeit. She was not slowly wasting away from a bitter draught. She was awaiting the executioner's sword. Her death, by beheading, was a public spectacle, a grim warning to anyone who might defy the king's will. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, insidious deaths by poison we've been discussing. Yet, the very fact that such a public, brutal execution was deemed necessary speaks volumes about the power Anne still wielded, even in her downfall, and the king's desperate need for a definitive, undeniable end to their marriage. Had she simply fallen ill and died, the legitimacy of any subsequent marriage and heir would forever be questioned, haunted by the specter of poison. Henry needed a clear break, a public repudiation of Anne, even if it meant resorting to the axe. So, while Anne Boleyn was not a poison queen in the literal sense, her story is inextricably linked to the paranoia and political machinations that made poison such a feared weapon in the royal courts. The accusations of poisoning against her, in the case of Catherine of Aragon's death, and the constant threat of it hovering over any powerful figure, highlight the pervasive nature of this fear. Her brutal end, though by sword, was the culmination of the same ruthless calculus of power, succession and ambition that drove many to resort to the silent chemistry of death. You are left with the chilling understanding that in this world, a queen's life was always a pawn in a larger game, whether that game ended with a bitter draught or a sharp blade. Let's shift our focus now to another queen, one whose life was tragically defined by mental illness, political manipulation, and a profound isolation that left her vulnerable to every kind of insidious threat, including the ever-present shadow of poison. Joanna of Castile, often known as Joanna the Mad. Her story is not one of direct poisoning, but rather an exploration of how the fear of poison, combined with her fragile mental state, was weaponized against her, leading to a lifetime of imprisonment. You, with your modern understanding of mental health and human rights, will find her tale particularly poignant and disturbing, a stark contrast to the compassionate care available today. Imagine yourself in the early 16th century in the royal courts of Spain, a kingdom newly unified and bursting with the wealth of the New World. The air here is rich with the scent of spices, the clang of distant church bells, and the solemnity of deep religious conviction. You see Joanna, daughter of the formidable Ferdinand and Isabella, a woman born into immense power, yet utterly stripped of it. From a young age, Joanna displayed signs of melancholy and an intense, possessive love for her husband, Philip the handsome Duke of Burgundy. Her emotional intensity, her grief after Philip's premature death, and her increasingly erratic behavior were deeply unsettling to the pragmatic, power-hungry men around her. Her madness, whether clinical depression, schizophrenia, or a severe form of obsessive grief, became a convenient tool for her father, Ferdinand II of Aragon, and later her son, Charles V, to seize control of her vast inheritance, the crowns of Castile and Aragon. Joanna was the legitimate queen, but her perceived instability made her vulnerable. You can feel the oppressive weight of her circumstances. A woman in a patriarchal society whose emotional distress was interpreted not as an illness to be treated, but as a dangerous impediment to stable rule. Your modern society might offer therapy and medication. Her world offered confinement and manipulation. The fear of poison played a crucial, though indirect, role in her story. For a queen deemed mad, the threat of poison was even more potent. If a mad queen were to suddenly die, it would be all too easy to attribute it to her fragile health, her unbalanced humors, or simply her own negligence. No one would question it too deeply. This made her an ideal target for anyone wishing to remove her permanently, and her family, though they chose imprisonment over outright murder, certainly used the threat of her death as a political lever. Imagine Joanna, locked away in the Santa Clara convent in Tordesillas, a fortress-like prison for over 40 years. You can feel the cold stone walls, the damp air, the crushing loneliness. Her only companions were a few loyal ladies-in-waiting, and a constant rotation of guards and officials appointed by her father and son. Every meal brought to her, every drink, would be viewed with suspicion. Even in her madness, a flicker of self-preservation must have remained. She was known to sometimes refuse food, fearing it was poisoned, or to eat only after prolonged scrutiny, a behavior often dismissed as further evidence of her derangement. You might empathize with her, seeing her refusal as a rational response to an irrational situation, a desperate attempt to maintain control over her own body in a world where everything else had been taken from her. Her captors, while not directly poisoning her, certainly benefited from the implication of her instability and vulnerability. Had Joanna died suddenly in her long captivity, few would have blinked an eye. The official narrative would have been that her fragile health finally gave way, a natural consequence of her madness. This lack of accountability, this easy deniability, made her imprisonment a constant tightrope walk between control and outright elimination. Her continued existence, albeit as a confined shadow, served a purpose. It maintained the legitimacy of her son Charles V's rule, as he could claim to be governing on behalf of his incapacitated mother. But it also meant she was a perpetual risk, a potential rallying point for rebels if she were ever to escape or be perceived as unjustly treated. The fear of poison was a pervasive undercurrent in all royal lives, but for Joanna, it was magnified by her isolation and the ease with which her death could be dismissed. Her custodians had to be careful not to actually poison her, as that would undermine the legitimacy of Charles V's rule. But they certainly exploited the fear of it, both in her own mind and in the minds of anyone who might try to intervene on her behalf. You can imagine the chilling effect this would have had on any potential rescuers or allies. If we try to free her and she suddenly dies, who will believe it wasn't natural? The tragedy of Joanna is not just that she was imprisoned, but that her mental illness was used as a justification for her political disempowerment. Her fears, including those of poisoning, were dismissed as delusions, when in the context of royal courts, they were often quite rational. You might reflect on how society treats those with mental illness, and how far we've come in understanding and compassion. For Joanna, her suffering was not just personal, it was weaponized against her, leading to a life lived in a gilded cage haunted by real and imagined threats. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that the shadow of poison extended beyond direct acts of murder. It was a tool of manipulation, a source of pervasive fear, and a convenient explanation for inconvenient deaths. For Joanna, it was yet another layer of torment in a life already consumed by grief and mental anguish, a silent, ever-present threat that underscored her profound vulnerability and the ruthless pragmatism of those who held her captive. You are left with the lingering image of a queen, isolated and tormented, forever looking at her food with suspicion, a tragic victim of a system that valued power over humanity. Let's move across the English Channel and forward in time to a queen who, despite never being directly poisoned herself, lived her entire reign under the constant, suffocating shadow of plots, assassination attempts, and the ever-present threat of poison. Elizabeth I of England. Her story is one of remarkable resilience, political genius, and an unwavering determination to survive in a world that constantly sought to unseat or eliminate her. You might know her as Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, but imagine yourself in her shoes, a monarch surrounded by enemies both foreign and domestic, where every meal, every gift, every new face in court could harbor a deadly intent. Your modern concept of state security, with its intelligence agencies and protective services, is a world away from the precarious existence of this iconic queen. Elizabeth's claim to the throne was precarious from the start. Daughter of Anne Boleyn, declared illegitimate by her father Henry VIII, and a Protestant in a nation still reeling from religious upheaval, she was a target for Catholic powers like Spain and France, and for English Catholics who saw her as a usurper. Her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic claimant to the English throne, became a focal point for numerous plots against Elizabeth. You can feel the intense pressure on Elizabeth, a woman ruling in a man's world, constantly having to prove her legitimacy and defend her life. The plots against Elizabeth were numerous and varied, ranging from open rebellion to clandestine assassination attempts. And in many of these plots, poison was a favored tool. Why? Because a sudden, mysterious death would be less likely to spark outright war or public outrage than a blatant assassination. It offered a degree of deniability, allowing the plotters to distance themselves from the act, while achieving their ultimate goal, the removal of the Protestant queen and her replacement by a Catholic monarch. Imagine the Queen's spymaster, Francis Walsingham, constantly uncovering these intricate webs of conspiracy, the sheer volume of threats he had to neutralize. Consider the Babington Plot of 1586, perhaps the most famous conspiracy against Elizabeth. While it ultimately led to Mary, Queen of Scots' execution, it involved plans for Elizabeth's assassination. While a knife or a gun might have been considered, the subtle nature of poison would have been highly attractive to conspirators. Imagine a foreign agent, perhaps disguised as a courtier or a servant, attempting to gain access to Elizabeth's food, her drink, or even her personal effects. The meticulous security measures around Elizabeth, particularly concerning her meals, were a direct response to this constant threat. Elizabeth herself was acutely aware of the danger. She reportedly had a strong, almost pathological aversion to illness, perhaps stemming from her early life experiences and the fear of being seen as weak or vulnerable. This aversion likely fueled her paranoia about poison. You can imagine her, a queen of immense intellect and sharp political instincts, scrutinizing every dish, every new face. Her trusted servants would have been under immense pressure, knowing that any mistake could cost them their lives, and potentially the life of their queen. The royal kitchen and dining rituals were elaborate theatrical performances designed to prevent poisoning. Food was prepared under strict supervision, often tasted multiple times by various officials before it reached the queen's table. Imagine the bustling kitchen, the array of dishes, the intense scrutiny from watchful eyes. Every ingredient, every pot, every utensil would be suspect. The queen's tasters, brave souls who literally put their lives on the line, would sample every morsel. You can almost feel the tension in the dining hall, the silent ceremony of the meal, with death potentially lurking in every bite. Even beyond food, the fear extended to everyday objects. Gifts from foreign dignitaries, new garments, even the queen's cosmetics, all were potential vectors for poison. Imagine a beautiful jewel-encrusted fan, presented with a flourish by an ambassador. While outwardly a gesture of goodwill, Elizabeth and her advisors would have considered the possibility of contact poisons, perhaps on the handle or even within the decorative elements. You, living in a world of product safety standards, rarely consider such dangers. For Elizabeth, it was a daily reality. The constant stress of living under such threats undoubtedly took a toll on Elizabeth. She was a woman who rarely showed weakness, but the internal strain must have been immense. The knowledge that any illness could be fatal, that any trusted face could be a traitor, would have been a heavy burden. You can almost feel the weight of her crown, not just physically but emotionally, knowing that it marked her as a perpetual target. Her fierce independence, her reliance on her own judgment, and her carefully cultivated image of strength were all defenses against a world that relentlessly sought to undermine her. The fact that Elizabeth I survived her long reign, 44 years, despite these myriad plots and threats, is a testament to her intelligence, her network of loyal spies, and her remarkable political acumen. She knew how to play the game, how to inspire loyalty, and how to neutralize her enemies. Her survival against such odds is a powerful narrative, demonstrating that while poison was a fearsome weapon, it was not always successful against a vigilant and well-protected monarch. Her story reminds you that the fear of poison was not just a historical curiosity, it was a deeply ingrained aspect of royal life, shaping security protocols, influencing political decisions, and casting a long shadow over the lives of those who wore the crown. For Elizabeth I, the threat of the poisoned cup was a constant companion, a chilling reminder of the fragility of power and the ever-present danger that lurked beneath the glittering surface of her glorious court. Her triumph over these threats makes her an even more compelling figure, a queen who faced down death daily and emerged victorious. Let's transition now to a queen whose reign, though still marked by profound political challenges, saw a subtle shift in the nature of threats, including the role of poison. Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. We're moving into the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment, a period when scientific thought was beginning to challenge old superstitions, and the intricate dance of diplomacy often replaced outright warfare. Yet even in these seemingly more civilized courts, the specter of poison, though perhaps less prevalent as a direct political tool, still lingered in the collective consciousness. You, with your understanding of modern medicine and political structures, will see how the dangers evolved but never entirely disappeared. Imagine yourself in the opulent Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, the air lighter perhaps than the brooding medieval castles, filled with the strains of classical music and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Maria Theresa, a formidable and intelligent ruler, inherited a vast, fragmented Habsburg Empire at the tender age of 23. She was the only female Habsburg sovereign, and her claim to the throne was immediately challenged by nearly every major European power in the War of the Austrian Succession. Her reign was defined by relentless warfare, sweeping reforms, and the monumental task of securing her dynasty. Unlike some earlier queens, her primary threats were not internal court rivals seeking to poison her, but external enemies seeking to dismember her empire. However, to assume poison was entirely off the table would be naive. While direct political poisoning of monarchs might have become less common due to improving medical knowledge, a growing emphasis on public image, and the rise of more formal diplomatic channels, the fear of it remained. For a woman like Maria Theresa, who bore 16 children and was the very embodiment of her dynasty, her health was paramount. Any illness, especially a sudden one, would naturally raise suspicions, even if the primary threat was from a rival nation on the battlefield. Imagine the Empress, a woman of immense energy and practical intelligence, presiding over her court. She is surrounded by a vast network of advisors, generals, and diplomats. Her meals, though perhaps not subject to the same overt taster rituals as earlier centuries, would still have been prepared and served with meticulous care. The sheer scale of her household, the number of staff, meant that security was always a concern. You can almost feel the constant vigilance, the underlying awareness that even in an age of reason, malevolence could still find a way. The shift in the nature of threats meant that poison, if used, would likely be deployed not by a disgruntled lady-in-waiting, but perhaps by a foreign agent, a spy seeking to destabilize the empire by removing its strong sovereign. Imagine a French or Prussian agent, seeking to sow chaos, attempting to bribe a kitchen servant or a physician. The motive here would be geopolitical, not personal vendetta or succession within the immediate court. This kind of threat is more akin to modern espionage, where the target is a head of state and the methods are covert. You, with your awareness of international intrigue, can see the continuity of this kind of danger, even as the specific forms evolve. Maria Theresa herself was a pragmatic ruler, not prone to excessive paranoia, but deeply aware of the dangers surrounding her. She understood that her life was inextricably linked to the fate of her empire. Her health was a matter of state. When she fell ill, as any human does, her recovery would be closely watched, and any lingering symptoms might spark rumors. For example, her eventual death in 1780 from a persistent cough and edema, while attributed to natural causes, likely pneumonia and heart failure, would still have carried an unspoken, almost automatic question in the minds of many: could it have been something else? The historical memory of poisoned queens was too strong to be entirely erased by the Enlightenment. Furthermore, the very act of being a powerful female monarch in a male-dominated world meant she was often subject to a different kind of scrutiny. Her strength was admired, but also sometimes seen as unnatural or even dangerous by her male counterparts. While not directly linked to poison, this underlying misogyny could create an environment where the natural death of a powerful woman might be less questioned than that of a man, making her potentially more vulnerable to a covert attack. You can feel the subtle biases of the era, the way gender could influence perception and vulnerability. The enduring fear of poison also manifested in the broader scientific and medical discourse of the era. The Enlightenment brought advances in chemistry and toxicology, but also a fascination with poisons and their effects. Doctors were beginning to understand the body better, to identify symptoms more accurately, and to develop rudimentary antidotes. This knowledge, while aimed at saving lives, also provided potential poisoners with a more sophisticated understanding of how to kill without detection, or how to mimic natural diseases more effectively. It was a double-edged sword. So, while Maria Theresa's reign is not marked by dramatic poisoning plots against her person, her story serves as a crucial bridge. It shows how the fear of poison evolved from a tool of internal court intrigue to a potential instrument of international espionage. The transparency of power was increasing, public opinion held more sway, and scientific understanding was slowly making deniable deaths harder to achieve. Yet, the deep-seated historical memory of the poisoned cup, the silent killer, continued to cast its long shadow, reminding even the most enlightened monarchs that their lives were always, ultimately, precarious. You are left with the understanding that even in an age of reason, the human heart, with its capacity for ambition and malevolence, remained untamed, and the threat of a bitter end, however subtle, was never truly absent from the royal chambers. You've seen the grand stages, the powerful queens, and the insidious methods. Now let's go behind the scenes into the workshops and private chambers where the tools of death were often crafted and delivered. We're talking about the apothecaries, the royal physicians, and the seemingly trusted household staff. The very people who were supposed to safeguard a queen's health and well-being, but who, through ambition, coercion, or malice, could become her most dangerous enemies. Your modern world has strict regulations for pharmacists and doctors, and clear lines of accountability. In this historical context, those lines were blurred, making betrayal terrifyingly easy. Imagine yourself in the cramped, aromatic shop of an apothecary. The air is thick with the scent of dried herbs, exotic spices, and the sharp tang of various chemicals. Shelves are lined with jars of powders, tinctures, and curious concoctions, many of which could be either medicine or poison depending on the dosage and intent. This is not a sterile pharmacy. It's a place of ancient knowledge, secret recipes, and often, a deep understanding of both healing and harming. The apothecary, a figure of respect and sometimes fear, held immense power. They knew the properties of plants, minerals, and animal extracts. They could create remedies to soothe or drafts to kill. You can almost see the flickering candlelight illuminating rows of dangerous substances, waiting to be wielded for good or ill. A royal apothecary or physician held an even more privileged and perilous position. They had direct access to the queen's person, her food, her medicines. They understood her constitution, her ailments, her routines. This intimate knowledge, meant to preserve life, could be twisted into the perfect blueprint for its termination. Imagine a royal physician, a man of learning and status, whose daily task is to prepare the queen's tonics, her herbal teas, her poultices. He has her trust, her ear, and crucially access to the most potent substances. If this man were to be bribed by a rival faction or coerced by a powerful enemy, he would be the ultimate, undetectable poisoner. He could administer a slow-acting poison, mimicking a natural illness, adjusting the dosage to perfectly match her existing ailments, ensuring her death appeared entirely natural. You, with your trust in medical professionals, would find this betrayal utterly horrifying, a violation of the most sacred trust. The danger wasn't just in the direct act. An apothecary could be persuaded to supply a poison to a third party, perhaps a lady-in-waiting or a servant, who would then administer it. The trail of evidence would be obscured, the apothecary claiming they were merely fulfilling a request for a medicinal compound, unaware of its true, deadly purpose. The lack of forensic science meant that such claims were almost impossible to disprove. This created a chilling network of potential complicity, where knowledge of poisons was a valuable and deadly commodity. Then there were the trusted household staff, the cooks, the cupbearers, the ladies-in-waiting, the chambermaids. These were the people who had the most intimate access to the queen's daily life, her food, her drink, her clothing, her private chambers. Imagine the royal kitchen, a bustling hive of activity, steam rising from massive cauldrons, the clatter of pots and pans. Amidst this chaos, a cook, perhaps disgruntled by a perceived slight, or offered a hefty sum by an ambitious courtier, could easily slip a tasteless powder into a stew, a sauce, or a dessert. You might think of your own trusted housekeepers or chefs. Now imagine them as potential instruments of death. The cupbearer, whose duty it was to pour the queen's wine and other beverages, was in an especially precarious position. A quick flick of the wrist, a tiny vial concealed in the palm, and a deadly substance could be introduced into the royal goblet. You can almost see the glint of the crystal, the deep red of the wine, and the subtle, almost imperceptible movement of a hand. This was a moment of profound vulnerability for the queen, a moment of immense temptation for a would-be poisoner. The very act of sharing a drink, a gesture of conviviality, could be turned into a death sentence. The ladies-in-waiting, often noble women themselves, were privy to the queen's most private moments. They helped her dress, prepared her bath, and often shared her confidences. This intimacy made them both invaluable companions and potential conduits for poison. Imagine a lady-in-waiting, perhaps jealous of the queen's position, or a pawn in a larger political game, applying a subtly poisoned cosmetic, or lacing a new pair of gloves with a contact venom, as was rumored with Catherine de' Medici. The trust placed in these women was absolute, and their betrayal, therefore, the most devastating. The motivation for these trusted hands could vary. It might be greed, the promise of wealth or advancement for themselves or their families. It could be coercion, a threat against their loved ones if they refused to participate. It could be political loyalty, a deep-seated belief that the queen's removal was for the greater good of the kingdom or their chosen faction. Or, in rarer cases, it could be sheer malevolence, a twisted desire to wield power over life and death. The constant fear of betrayal from within one's own household would have been a relentless torment for a queen. You can build walls, employ guards, but how do you guard against the hands that dress you, feed you, and tend to your most intimate needs? This profound vulnerability, this forced reliance on individuals who could turn traitor, highlights the exquisite terror of royal life. It wasn't just external enemies, it was the enemy within, cloaked in loyalty and trusted service. The lack of forensics meant that these acts often went unpunished, the poisoner disappearing back into the fabric of court life, leaving behind only whispers and suspicions. This impunity further emboldened those who sought to use poison as a political tool. The queen, for all her grandeur, was utterly dependent on the integrity of those around her, a dependence that was often tragically betrayed. You are left with a chilling understanding of how easily the most intimate relationships could be corrupted, and how the very people entrusted with a queen's care could become the instruments of her demise. The apothecary's shop, the royal kitchen, the queen's private chambers, these were not just places of daily life. They were potential crime scenes, silent arenas where the fate of nations could be decided with a single bitter draught. That you've seen the danger, the motives, and the dark hands that delivered death. Now let's explore the desperate measures taken to combat this invisible threat, the elaborate rituals and often futile attempts to protect a queen from the poisoned cup. Forget your modern medical advancements, your emergency rooms, and your highly effective antidotes. We're stepping into a world where protection was often a blend of pragmatism, superstition, and sheer luck. Your reliance on scientific certainty would be a dangerous luxury here. First and foremost, there were the royal tasters. This was perhaps the most direct and chilling countermeasure. Imagine a dedicated individual, often a trusted servant or even a minor noble, whose sole purpose was to sample every dish and every drink before it reached the royal lips. You can almost see them, standing silently by the queen's table, their face impassive as they take a bite of roasted meat, a sip of wine. The tension in the room would be palpable. Everyone, including the queen, would watch for any sign of distress, any cough, any sudden pallor. This wasn't a job for the faint of heart, it was a daily gamble with death. A taster's life was literally on the line, a sacrifice made in the desperate hope of preserving the monarchs. Can you imagine the psychological burden of such a role? Every meal, every sip, a potential death sentence. And the queen, watching this grim ritual, would be constantly reminded of the ever-present danger. It's a testament to the pervasive fear that such a morbid profession was not only accepted but considered essential. Beyond tasters, the entire food preparation process was a fortress of precautions. Royal kitchens were often guarded, access restricted, and cooks supervised at every stage. Ingredients might be sourced from trusted suppliers, and even then inspected for any signs of tampering. Imagine the bustling kitchen, but with an undercurrent of intense scrutiny. Every pot, every utensil, Every hand involved in preparing the royal meal was under suspicion. The queen's food might even be prepared in a separate, secure kitchen, distinct from the rest of the court, to minimize opportunities for sabotage. You, who might casually grab a snack from your fridge, can barely conceive of such a meticulously guarded culinary process. Then there were the antidotes, a fascinating blend of rudimentary science, folk medicine, and sheer superstition. In an age before toxicology, a true universal antidote was a pipe dream. Instead, people relied on various concoctions and practices. One of the most famous was the theriac, a complex mixture of dozens of ingredients, including opium, viper's flesh, and various herbs, first developed in ancient Greece and refined over centuries. It was believed to be a panacea, a cure-all for poisons and diseases. Queens might take a small dose daily as a preventative measure, hoping it would build immunity or neutralize any slow-acting toxins. Imagine the queen, grimacing as she swallows a spoonful of this bitter, pungent mixture, a desperate act of faith rather than scientific certainty. Bezoar stones, calcified concretions found in the stomachs of certain animals, like goats, were highly prized. They were believed to have magical anti-poison properties. A queen might wear one as an amulet, or have it placed in her drink, believing its presence would neutralize any venom. You can almost see the smooth, polished stone, perhaps set in a silver goblet, a symbol of desperate hope. While scientifically useless, the psychological comfort they offered was perhaps invaluable in an age of pervasive fear. Other antidotes included powdered unicorn horn, likely narwhal tusk, believed to detect or neutralize poison by sweating or changing color when near it. Imagine a queen carefully stirring her drink with a valuable unicorn horn spoon, watching for any telltale sign. These were expensive, exotic items, symbols of status and desperate attempts at protection. They highlight the limited scientific understanding of the time and the human tendency to seek magical solutions when rational ones are unavailable. The concept of purging and vomiting was also a common, if brutal, countermeasure. If a queen suspected she had been poisoned, or even if she simply felt unwell, she might be given emetics to induce vomiting, or strong laxatives to clear her system. While this might have helped in some cases of acute poisoning, it was often a traumatic and debilitating experience, and could even hasten death if the poison had already taken hold or if the victim was already weakened. You, with your access to modern emergency medicine, can appreciate the crude and often dangerous nature of these historical interventions. Beyond the physical, there was a strong element of superstition and religious belief in protection. Prayers, blessings, wearing religious amulets, and consulting astrologers or seers were all part of the queen's arsenal against unseen dangers. You might see a queen wearing a crucifix or a saint's medal, not just for piety, but for perceived protection against malevolent forces, including poison. The belief in divine intervention was a source of comfort in a world where human agency often felt powerless against such insidious threats. Finally, there was the constant vigilance of the queen and her trusted advisors. This was perhaps the most effective, albeit mentally exhausting, countermeasure. Elizabeth I, for example, relied heavily on her spymaster, Francis Walsingham, to uncover plots before they could be executed. This involved a vast network of spies, informants, and code breakers, working tirelessly to detect any hint of conspiracy. You can feel the constant tension, the relentless surveillance, the intricate dance of intelligence gathering that was essential for survival. It was a battle of wits, where the queen's life hung in the balance. These countermeasures, though often imperfect and sometimes purely superstitious, speak volumes about the pervasive fear of poison in royal courts. They reveal a world where the most powerful individuals lived in a constant state of alert, forced to employ elaborate rituals and rely on dubious remedies to safeguard their lives. You are left with a profound sense of the precariousness of royal existence, and the lengths to which people would go to protect a queen from the silent, invisible hand of death. The bitter draught was a constant threat, and the attempts to thwart it were as varied, desperate, and often heartbreakingly futile as the era itself. You've seen the methods, the motives, and the desperate attempts at protection. Now, let's delve into the most insidious and often overlooked consequence of living under the constant threat of poison: the profound psychological toll it took on the queens themselves. Forget your modern concepts of mental well-being, your access to therapy, and your ability to cultivate trusting relationships. We're exploring a world where the mind could become its own prison, warped by an unrelenting atmosphere of distrust and isolation. You'll feel the heavy weight of a crown that, far from being a symbol of security, became a constant reminder of vulnerability. Imagine being a queen, a figure of immense power and public scrutiny, yet utterly alone in your fear. Every smile from a courtier, every gift, every meal becomes a source of anxiety. You're expected to be serene, regal, a beacon of stability for your kingdom. But inside, your mind is a maelstrom of suspicion. Is that new cough a natural affliction, or the first symptom of a slow-acting poison? Did that lady-in-waiting just glance at you strangely, or is it just your imagination? You start to question everything, everyone. The world around you, once a source of beauty and power, transforms into a labyrinth of potential threats. This constant hypervigilance is exhausting. You can't relax, you can't truly trust. Sleep becomes fitful, haunted by nightmares of agonizing pain or silent betrayal. Your appetite might wane, not from illness, but from the sheer dread of consuming something deadly. You might develop obsessive behaviors, repeatedly checking your food, insisting on specific servants, avoiding new dishes. These behaviors, if noticed by others, could easily be dismissed as eccentricity, hypochondria, or even signs of madness, further isolating you and undermining your credibility. You, with your knowledge of anxiety disorders and PTSD, can recognize the symptoms of profound psychological distress, but in that era, such understanding was non-existent. The erosion of trust is perhaps the most devastating psychological consequence. A queen is surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands, of people. Her family, her advisors, her ladies, her servants, all are part of her inner circle. But if any one of them could be a potential poisoner, how can she truly connect with anyone? Friendships become transactional, alliances fragile, and intimacy almost impossible. Imagine being unable to confide in anyone, to share your deepest fears, because the person you're speaking to might be the very one plotting your demise. This forced isolation, this profound loneliness at the pinnacle of power, would be a crushing burden. You might feel the coldness of a queen's demeanor, interpret it as arrogance, but perhaps it was simply a protective shell, a necessary defense mechanism in a world designed to betray her. This pervasive distrust could lead to genuine paranoia, blurring the lines between real threats and imagined ones. A queen might start to see enemies everywhere, to interpret innocent actions as malicious intent. This mental state, while understandable given the circumstances, could further alienate her from her court, making her appear erratic or tyrannical. Her legitimate fears could be dismissed as delusions, especially if she was already a woman in a position of power, often subject to accusations of hysteria or emotional instability. Think of Joanna the Mad, whose very real fears of poisoning were dismissed as part of her madness. This double bind, being in genuine danger but having your fears dismissed as irrational, would be a deeply frustrating and terrifying experience. The burden of knowing that your body, your very existence, is a political instrument also takes a heavy toll. A queen is expected to produce heirs, to maintain her beauty, to embody the strength of her dynasty. Any illness, any perceived weakness, can be exploited by her enemies. This creates immense pressure to appear strong and healthy, even when internally she is battling profound fear and anxiety. You can almost feel the performative aspect of her life, the constant need to project an image of unwavering fortitude, even as her mind is racing with dread. This psychological torment wasn't just a personal matter, it had ripple effects throughout the court. A paranoid queen would naturally foster a paranoid court. Her distrust would breed distrust among her courtiers, creating a climate of suspicion, backbiting, and fear. Everyone would be watching everyone else, trying to discern motives, to uncover plots, or simply to survive. This creates a deeply unhealthy environment, where genuine loyalty is rare, and self-preservation becomes the overriding concern. The story of the Poison Queens, therefore, is not just a tale of physical violence. It is a profound exploration of psychological warfare. The constant threat of poison was designed not just to kill, but to destabilize, to isolate, and to ultimately break the spirit of those who wielded power. You are left with a chilling understanding that even if a queen was never actually poisoned, the fear of it could inflict a slow, agonizing death on her peace of mind, transforming her glittering cage into a personal hell. The crown, for all its splendor, could be a crushing weight, pressing down on the mind, turning golden dreams into bitter nightmares of distrust and isolation that you felt the paranoia and the psychological toll. Now let's explore one of the most terrifying aspects of the era: the agonizing uncertainty, the blurring of lines between natural illness, deliberate poisoning, and even supernatural intervention. Forget your medical diagnoses and your scientific explanations. We're stepping into a world where a queen's sudden illness or lingering decline could be attributed to a myriad of causes, making the poisoner's job terrifyingly easy and justice almost impossible. Your modern clarity of cause and effect would be utterly lost in this murky historical landscape. Imagine a queen, vibrant and healthy one day, suddenly struck down by a mysterious ailment the next. Perhaps she develops a persistent cough, a fever, or agonizing stomach cramps. Today you'd likely head to an emergency room, undergo tests, and receive a diagnosis. But in a royal court of centuries past, the royal physicians, with their limited knowledge of anatomy, microbiology, and toxicology, would be at a loss. They might attribute her illness to an imbalance of humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, believing that a surplus or deficiency of one caused the affliction. They might prescribe bloodletting, purging, or exotic herbal remedies, many of which were ineffective or even harmful. You can almost feel the desperation in the Queen's chambers as physicians argue over diagnoses, their faces etched with concern, their pronouncements often more guesswork than science. This medical uncertainty was the poisoner's greatest ally. Many poisons, particularly the slow-acting ones, were specifically chosen because their symptoms mimicked common diseases. Arsenic, for instance, could easily be mistaken for cholera or dysentery. Belladonna could induce delirium that looked like madness or fever. The cunning poisoner would select a substance whose effects aligned with a pre-existing condition of the queen, or with a prevalent illness of the season, making the death appear entirely natural. Imagine the queen suffering from chronic digestive issues. A poison that exacerbates these symptoms would be virtually undetectable as anything other than a worsening of her natural condition. This calculated mimicry was the epitome of insidious treachery. Beyond natural illness, there was the pervasive belief in witchcraft and sorcery. In an age of deep religious faith and widespread superstition, any unexplained illness, especially among the powerful, could be attributed to dark magic. Imagine a queen suddenly wasting away, her beauty fading, her mind becoming clouded. Instead of suspecting poison, her court might conclude she had been cursed by a jealous rival, or afflicted by a malevolent witch. This belief could lead to witch hunts, accusations, and trials, diverting attention entirely from the real poisoner who might be quietly observing the chaos they had wrought. You, with your scientific worldview, might scoff at such beliefs, but for them, they were very real and terrifying explanations for the inexplicable. The fear of witchcraft and poison often intertwined. Some believed that poisons were themselves a form of dark magic, brewed with malevolent intent and infused with curses. Or that a witch might use a poisoned object, like a doll or a piece of clothing, to inflict harm from a distance. This blurring of lines made it even harder to identify the true nature of the threat. Was it a natural disease, a chemical agent, or a supernatural attack? The answer often depended on who was asking, and what narrative served their political agenda. Consider the role of rumor and political opportunism. When a queen fell ill, the court would become a hotbed of whispers. Rivals would seize the opportunity to spread rumors of poison, accusing their enemies, or using the queen's vulnerability to advance their own agendas. Even if the queen genuinely suffered from a natural ailment, the public perception, fueled by these rumors, could be that she had been poisoned. This was a form of psychological warfare, where the mere suggestion of poison could be as damaging as its actual use, undermining trust and destabilizing the court. The lack of forensic science was the ultimate enabler of this ambiguity. There were no toxicology labs to analyze bodily fluids for traces of poison, no detailed autopsies, or if performed they were often crude and inconclusive, and no scientific methods to differentiate between the symptoms of disease and the effects of venom. A royal death, even if suspicious, often remained a mystery, leaving future historians to speculate and current courtiers to whisper. You, with your expectation of clear answers, would find this historical void deeply frustrating. This constant uncertainty created an environment of profound anxiety for everyone, not just the queen. Physicians feared misdiagnosing poison as illness, which could lead to accusations of incompetence or even complicity. Courtiers feared being wrongly accused of poisoning, or of failing to protect the monarch. The entire court lived under a cloud of ambiguity, where death could strike at any moment, from any cause, and often without clear explanation. The blurring of lines between natural illness, witchcraft, and deliberate poisoning made the royal courts a terrifying place to live and die. It allowed poisoners to operate with impunity, cloaking their heinous acts in the guise of natural misfortune or supernatural malevolence. You are left with a chilling appreciation for the fragility of truth in an age of ignorance and ambition, and the profound vulnerability of those who wore the crown to the most insidious forms of attack, where even death itself could not be trusted to be natural. You've journeyed through the darkest corners of royal courts, witnessed the fear, the paranoia, and the insidious nature of poison. Now let's explore a crucial shift: the gradual decline of poison as a primary political tool, replaced by other, often equally brutal but more overt, methods. This isn't to say poison disappeared entirely, but its prevalence and effectiveness began to wane as Europe moved towards modernity. Forget the constant, unseen threat. We're entering an era where the cards were increasingly played on the table, even if the game remained deadly. Your understanding of legal systems and scientific advancements will help you see why this transition occurred. One of the most significant factors in the decline was the advancement of medical and scientific knowledge. The Enlightenment, as we touched upon with Maria Theresa, brought a new emphasis on reason and empirical observation. Doctors, though still limited, began to develop a better understanding of anatomy, disease, and the properties of various substances. The scientific method slowly chipped away at the superstitions that had long cloaked poisonings in mystery. You can imagine the gradual shift: fewer diagnoses of humoral imbalances and more attempts at understanding specific diseases. Crucially, toxicology as a nascent science began to emerge in the 18th and 19th centuries. Figures like Matthew Orfila, often considered the father of modern toxicology, developed methods to detect poisons like arsenic in human tissues. While these methods were not immediately widespread or perfect, their very existence began to make the poisoner's job much harder. The fear of detection, of being scientifically proven guilty, became a powerful deterrent. Imagine a poisoner in an earlier century, confident in their anonymity. Now they faced the growing risk of their silent crime being exposed by scientific means. This shift in accountability was a game changer. Concurrently, there was a rise in public opinion and the power of the press. Monarchs, even absolute ones, became more sensitive to their public image. A sudden, mysterious death in the royal family, especially if accompanied by rumors of poison, could spark scandal, unrest, and undermine the legitimacy of the successor. It was often politically safer to deal with rivals through more transparent means, imprisonment, exile, or even public execution, though these also came with their own risks, than to risk the lingering stain of a poisoning accusation. You, with your awareness of media scrutiny, can appreciate how the court of public opinion could influence the actions of rulers. The consolidation of state power and the development of formal legal systems also played a role. As kingdoms evolved into more centralized nation-states, the rule of law, however imperfect, gained more traction. While still subject to royal will, legal processes became more formalized, and the consequences for illicit acts, even those against rivals, became more severe and less easily sidestepped. Open court trials, though often biased, offered a veneer of justice that was preferable to the murky suspicions surrounding a poisoning. This meant that assassinations, when they occurred, were often more direct and attributable, rather than relying on the clandestine nature of poison. Furthermore, warfare and diplomacy became increasingly sophisticated. While conflicts were still brutal, the focus shifted to large-scale military engagements and intricate diplomatic negotiations, rather than the covert elimination of individual leaders. The stakes were empires, not just individual lives, and the tools of power reflected this scale. You might think of the grand alliances and conflicts of the 18th and 19th centuries. These were battles of armies and treaties, not poison goblets. The decline of certain superstitions also contributed. As scientific understanding grew, the belief in witchcraft and supernatural causes for illness began to wane, making it harder for poisoners to hide their crimes behind such convenient explanations. While superstition never fully disappeared, its hold on the educated elite weakened, leading to a more rational approach to unexplained deaths. However, it's crucial to understand that poison didn't vanish entirely. It simply became less common as a primary political tool for removing monarchs or high-ranking figures. It still existed in the shadows, used in smaller-scale intrigues, or by desperate individuals. The fear of it, too, lingered in the collective memory, a historical echo that continued to inform security measures and fuel public suspicion whenever a powerful figure died suddenly. You can almost feel the residual dread, the memory of past terrors that still colored perceptions, even as the immediate threat diminished. The 19th and 20th centuries saw the rise of new forms of assassination, often involving firearms or explosives, more overt and less deniable than poison. These methods, while brutal, reflected a different kind of political landscape, one shaped by mass movements, revolutionary fervor, and industrial technology. The age of the subtle, silent killer, the poisoner cloaked in ambiguity, was slowly giving way to a more direct, if equally violent, form of political struggle. So, while the glittering courts continued to hold their secrets, and human ambition remained undimmed, the specific terror of the Poison Queen began to recede into history. This shift marks a fascinating transition, reflecting not just scientific progress, but also evolving political structures and changing societal norms. You are left with the understanding that while the methods of power changed, the struggle for it remained eternal, albeit with a slightly less bitter taste. You've witnessed the rise and partial decline of the Poison Queen. Now, let's reflect on the enduring legacy of this terrifying phenomenon, how it shaped history, influenced the collective imagination, and continues to resonate in our understanding of power and vulnerability. Forget the fleeting headlines of your modern news cycle. We're talking about a historical imprint that has lasted for centuries, coloring perceptions and fueling narratives. The most immediate legacy was the profound impact on royal courts and security protocols. The constant threat of poison forced monarchs to adopt elaborate security measures that became ingrained in court etiquette. The royal taster, the guarded kitchens, the meticulous supervision of personal effects. These were not mere traditions, but vital defenses born of necessity. Even as the direct threat of poison waned, many of these rituals persisted, becoming symbols of royal dignity and security, a silent acknowledgement of the historical dangers. You can almost see the echoes of this fear in the security details surrounding modern heads of state, a continuous thread of vigilance spanning centuries. Beyond security, the fear of poison shaped political behavior and succession. The suspicious death of a monarch, even if natural, could plunge a kingdom into chaos, sparking wars of succession or civil unrest. This forced royal families and their advisors to be acutely aware of the implications of any sudden illness or death, leading to careful management of information and often elaborate displays of grief and continuity. The very uncertainty surrounding poison could be weaponized, used to discredit rivals or to justify political maneuvers. The legacy also profoundly affected the public imagination and popular culture. The tales of poisoned queens became powerful narratives, embedded in folklore, literature, and later, film and television. Figures like Catherine de' Medici became archetypal Black Widows, embodying cunning, ruthlessness, and the dark side of female power. These stories, often exaggerated and embellished, served as cautionary tales, thrilling mysteries, and dramatic explorations of ambition and betrayal. You, with your love of historical dramas and true crime podcasts, are still consuming these narratives, drawn to the chilling blend of glamour and danger. Consider the enduring fascination with figures like Lucrezia Borgia. Despite much historical debate about her actual involvement in poisonings, her name remains synonymous with the practice. This shows how a powerful narrative, once established, can overshadow historical fact, becoming a cultural touchstone that defines an era or a character. The poison chalice, the subtle venom, the silent killer. These are images that evoke immediate recognition and a primal sense of dread, demonstrating the lasting power of these historical fears. The stories of poisoned queens also contributed to a broader understanding of power and its corrupting influence. They revealed the brutal underbelly of absolute rule, demonstrating that even at the pinnacle of society, life was fragile and constantly under threat. They highlighted the moral compromises made in the pursuit of power, and the lengths to which individuals would go to secure or maintain their position. This dark side of power resonates with universal themes of human nature, making these stories eternally compelling. Furthermore, the historical context of royal poisonings offers a stark contrast to modern life, as we've explored throughout our journey. It reminds you of the immense progress in medicine, food safety, and legal systems. Your ability to trust your food, to seek medical help without fear of foul play, and to live in a relatively secure environment is a direct result of centuries of scientific and societal evolution. The stories of poisoned queens serve as a visceral reminder of a time when such basic securities were unimaginable luxuries. This contrast deepens your appreciation for the comforts and protections of your own era. The legacy also includes a more nuanced understanding of women in power. While many accusations of poisoning against queens were likely fabricated or exaggerated, they reflect a societal anxiety about female authority. Women who wielded power effectively, especially in a male-dominated world, were often subjected to accusations of unnatural cunning, manipulation, or dark arts. Poisoning, a subtle and often deniable method, fit neatly into these stereotypes, allowing powerful women to be simultaneously feared and demonized. You can almost feel the historical bias, the way accusations could be wielded not just to kill, but to control and diminish female agency. Finally, the enduring legacy is a powerful testament to the fragility of life and the human condition. Despite all the pomp and circumstance, the immense wealth and privilege, queens were ultimately mortal, vulnerable to the same physical frailties as anyone else, and often far more vulnerable to deliberate malice. Their lives, played out on a grand stage, served as dramatic reminders of death's indiscriminate reach, and the constant dance between ambition and mortality. You are left with a deeper understanding of how the historical shadow of the poisoned queen continues to inform our collective consciousness, a chilling and compelling reminder of a brutal, beautiful, and ultimately terrifying past. You've journeyed through the glittering yet terrifying courts of Europe, smelled the perfumes and the underlying fear, witnessed the ambition and the dread. We've delved into the methods, the motives, the paranoia, and the tragic psychological toll of living under the shadow of the poison cup. Now, as we draw to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on what this dark chapter of history truly means for us today, sitting in your safe, well-lit space, far removed from the chilling realities we've explored. This final segment offers closure, a chance to process the visceral experiences and consider the lasting implications of the gilded cage. Think back to the initial contrast, your comfortable life versus the constant vigilance of a queen. That contrast is not just a dramatic device, it's a profound testament to the progress of human society. You live in a world where a sudden illness is met with medical intervention, not immediate suspicion of murder. Your food is regulated, your water filtered, your personal safety largely assured by laws and infrastructure. The very fabric of your daily existence is built on a foundation of trust and accountability that simply did not exist for these queens. You can feel a sense of relief, perhaps, a quiet gratitude for the unseen protections that safeguard your life, protections earned through centuries of struggle against the very forces we've discussed. The stories of the Poison Queens are more than just historical curiosities. They are stark reminders of the extreme lengths to which human ambition can drive individuals. Power, in its most absolute forms, often breeds ruthlessness, and the absence of clear moral or legal boundaries allows the darkest impulses to flourish. You've seen how love, revenge, religion, and the desperate need for an heir could be twisted into motives for murder. These are universal human emotions, but in the high-stakes environment of a royal court, they took on a deadly, chilling precision. It challenges you to consider the nature of power itself, and how easily it can corrupt, even the most seemingly civilized environments. Consider the profound isolation these queens must have felt. Surrounded by opulence, attended by countless servants, yet utterly alone in their fear and distrust. The crown, a symbol of ultimate authority, simultaneously became a symbol of profound vulnerability, marking them as targets. You've imagined the constant mental strain, the erosion of trust, the gnawing paranoia that could transform a beautiful palace into a gilded prison of the mind. This internal torment, often more devastating than any physical poison, is a powerful reminder of the psychological cost of living under such immense pressure and constant threat. It makes you appreciate the simple freedom of being able to trust those around you, to share a meal without fear, to sleep soundly without the specter of a silent killer. The blurring of lines between illness, poison, and even witchcraft highlights humanity's desperate attempts to understand and control the inexplicable. In an age of limited scientific knowledge, fear and superstition filled the void, making it terrifyingly easy for poisoners to hide their crimes behind the guise of natural misfortune or supernatural malevolence. You've seen how this ambiguity was a poisoner's greatest ally, and how it made justice almost impossible. It underscores the vital importance of scientific inquiry, critical thinking, and robust legal systems in establishing truth and accountability. And what about the queens themselves? Figures like Catherine de' Medici and Boleyn, Joanna the Mad, and Elizabeth I, though their stories are vastly different, all shared a common thread. They were women in positions of immense power, navigating a male-dominated world where their lives were constantly scrutinized, manipulated, and threatened. The accusations of poisoning, whether true or false, often served to undermine their authority, to portray them as cunning and unnatural. This historical lens offers a powerful perspective on gender and power, reminding you of the unique challenges faced by women who dared to rule. As you sit here now, perhaps taking a sip of your own drink, or simply breathing easy in your secure home, let the echoes of those poisoned courts linger. Let them remind you of the fragility of life, the cunning of human ambition, and the profound journey humanity has taken from a world haunted by silent killers to one where safety and justice, though imperfect, are largely expected. The bitter draft, once a terrifying reality for Europe's queens, serves as a powerful historical mirror, reflecting a past we are fortunate to have left behind, yet one whose lessons continue to resonate with chilling clarity. The gilded cage, for all its splendor, ultimately held a constant, terrifying secret, that even a queen's life could be extinguished with a single silent, bitter taste.